What's the toughest job in F1? The driving? Forget about it. That's the easy part. The hardest job in F1 is, without doubt, running a team. And I should know. I'm Otmar Szafnauer, and I've served as team principal for both the Aston Martin and Alpine F1 teams. From signing drivers to getting stuck into F1 politics, I've done it all. And on this show, I'll lift the lid on just what it takes to do the job. I'll also give my unique perspective on what's going on in F1 right now and share some behind-the-scenes stories from my career. Welcome to the Team Principal Podcast.
Ben, how are you?
I'm good. Very good. Thanks, Otmar. How are you?
Yeah, I'm well, thank you. A bit of time's gone by since we've talked last, and it's amazing how much changes in a short period of time in Formula One.
Yeah. I'm excited to get stuck into some more team principal chat because since we last convened on this podcast, I think it was just before Imola that we spoke. We had a quick fire run of 4 races in 6 weeks. And as you say, a lot's happened. So let's get into it. I want to start this episode by taking you back actually to the very first edition of this podcast, pre-season. You and I were talking about the 2025 driver lineups, and in that episode you said the pair you'd like to manage most would be the Ferrari duo of Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton. And I mentioned this because the man who's currently doing that job, Fred Vasseur, is coming under a bit of pressure for Ferrari's lacklustre form so far. So how would you like to be in Fred's shoes right now?
Managing Ferrari or being the team principal is never easy. The expectations are high. They're a team that the whole world knows, and it's the national team of Italy as well. And Fred is a good friend, and he's very long-time racer and very competent. So I would be surprised if Fred didn't know the pressures he was going to be under when he took the job. So I doubt that it's a surprise to him. And the only thing I would say is it does take more time than owners usually have to change things in Formula One, to move up anyway. To move down is it can be a very slippery slope to the bottom. But to take a team from where it is and move it up the grid is harder. And it's really, really hard when you get to the pointy end of the grid because everybody's competent, everybody wants to win. And the closer you get to doing that, to winning a championship, the harder it is. I mean, McLaren have done a great job in the last 2 years. And because McLaren's resurgence, it makes it harder on the rest, including Ferrari. So, but I wish Fred good success, and hopefully he could be making that progress that he wants. But like I say, it takes time. It takes time to recruit the right people. They can't, even if they say yes, I'll join your project. Many of them can't come tomorrow because they're on long-term contracts or long-term gardening periods. And if you have that, then it's hard to add talent straight away. And if the performance dips relative to the others, or your performance stays the same, it's just the others have improved, it looks like your performance is dipping while you're waiting for some individuals that you've identified that could help shortcut the process to better performance. And I think that's probably what's happening at Ferrari and Fred.
Do you think he's kind of run out of his honeymoon period now? Because obviously we're now into kind of season 3, halfway through season 3 of Vasseur Ferrari, and you get that grace period to, as you say, shape the team the way you want, restructure things, hire people. Like you say, it takes time. There's gardening leave and all that kind of stuff. But at this point, you've got to say, well, it's more Fred's team than it was when he joined. So do you think there's that element of patience is running out and he hasn't got the kind of buffer that he had when he started?
It could be, but I think what I'm saying is that buffer is always not long enough. And
right.
If you look at teams that are successful, the one thing they all have in common is stability at the top. Christian Horner's been successful at Red Bull. He's been there for a long time. Toto Wolff has been successful at Mercedes. He's been there for a long time. And even, when Mercedes have dipped in the recent past in this era of ground effect cars, so to speak, Toto remained at the top, and lo and behold, they won a race last weekend. If you're changing the senior management team often, then you get that buffer period again, like you say. Okay, well, here's a new team principal. We'll give him a year and a half or 2 years or 3 years to improve, and you get perhaps steady improvement or even a half step backward sometimes to take 2 steps forward. And when you take that half step backwards and then the senior or the owners change you or change a team principal, you start over again. Okay, well, we'll give them a year and a half of buffer. And in that year and a half or 2 years of buffer, you're never performing. So you need stability.
Yeah, this is the big fork in the road, I think, for Ferrari, because the reports coming out of Italy are basically saying, well, this is the final year of the original 3-year Vasseur contract. And because performance has dipped this year, obviously they came so close to beating McLaren to the Constructors' Championship last year. This season hasn't started that well. The stories are basically saying, well, if he doesn't pick results up before the end of the season, they won't renew his contract and he'll be out. And the flip side of that is the team has basically got on the attack, and Vasseur's strategy for dealing with it is basically saying, well, this is disrespectful to the team, it's hurting the team. How do you see that? Is the Ferrari team principal job one that basically involves a kind of unique strategy for dealing with basically Italian media?
So, yeah, for me, you can't ignore the media because the media is part of our sport. So you definitely have to address the media. But I think most importantly is focusing on recruiting the right people in order to improve on-track performance, and then the media follows. It's just sometimes you don't have enough time to do that, and then the media is never on your side. So, it's a bit of a conundrum.
What do you make of the job Fred's done so far?
Well, he's recruited some good people. Some of them have recently started. I believe it was him that got Lewis to go. 7-time world champion. I have the utmost respect for Lewis. Leclerc is, he's a race winner, excellent driver, so he's got a good driver pairing. Internally, hard for me to say, as I don't know the areas within Ferrari that need bolstering or the areas where they're best in Formula One. And what I would have done is looked at, what areas relative to the others are you best at and keep that the same, and what areas relative to the others need a bit of bolstering, and then started looking elsewhere to see who's best in Formula One that I can recruit and get to come to improve total performance. But the drivers are just part of it.
Do you think, Lewis not having the best of starts, there was so much hype, when we talked about it pre-season, it was the biggest story of the winter, really, Hamilton finally arriving at Ferrari. And, they did loads of promotion around his first tests and whatnot, but the start has been difficult. It's been underwhelming, basically. Do you think that's added to the pressure that Vasseur's under in terms of the negative reaction to Ferrari's form?
I don't know, but for me, I'm not surprised. Lewis is the best driver in my day, and most successful driver in my time in Formula One that I've been around. But I'm not surprised that it takes time to acclimate to a new team like Ferrari when you've come from being at your last team for many, many years. He was at Mercedes. He knew his engineering team. He knew the strategist. He knew the technical director. He knew the designers, the chief engineer very, very well. And, it's a little bit like, I hate to compare it to a football team, but it's a little bit like when you play together 5, 6, 7 years in the same football team. As a midfielder, you don't have to look up to see what the left winger's doing anymore, because in this situation, when I've had the ball before as a midfielder, that left winger is going to run down the wing for 5 yards and then cut in. You don't even have to look, because that's what he does all the time. And you can pass the ball right where he's going to be. That doesn't happen at the beginning. Your first year playing in that team, you don't know what that left winger is going to do. But that happens over time. And same thing happens in Formula One. You become very comfortable knowing how the engineers and the strategist and the team principal and everyone around you is going to react in different situations. And that allows you to get to a higher level of performance quicker. And that takes time. And it's going to take Lewis time. But I think as time goes on, he'll get more and more comfortable. He'll understand those things, and his performance will be better. I will predict that by the end of the year, he'll be very close to having the same amount, if not more points than Charles. And he's a little bit behind now, but I think as time goes on, he'll get closer and closer because he'll know the team more.
Tell us a bit about your relationship with Fred. You mentioned earlier that he's a good friend, so you must know him quite well, know his personality, etc. Tell us a bit about that. Also, how you think he fits in terms of Ferrari, because obviously character's quite important in that role.
Yeah, so Fred I know well. Ferrari internally I don't know that well, so it's hard for me to tell you how he fits there. But I know his management style is not too dissimilar to mine. He's not very autocratic. He listens. He allows people to do their jobs once they're in their certain roles. He doesn't micromanage, but he does, set the direction and the objectives of, what needs to happen to be successful. So I like his management style, and I would do the same. So I just hope that the seniors at Ferrari or the owners or the decision makers, give him ample time to actually affect the change that he's started to make, and perhaps see the fruits of his labor. So, and maybe that'll happen by the end of the year. Perhaps their performance will start improving. Like I said, some of his recruits have started there now, and but even when you start, it does take a little bit of time to affect change. The difficulty with this year, as I see it, is next year is such a big regulation change. I don't know how much more effort, especially in the wind tunnel where you have limited time, they're going to spend on this year's car. I would suggest that not much at all at this point in the season. And if
it's just come out, I think Ferrari have confirmed actually that the 2025 car's now out of the tunnel. There's some developments in the pipeline that will come through in the later races, but now they have finally done the switch 5 to 6.
There were times where I've seen the car not change at all in the latter half of the year, but the performance gains were still there. And that's because you don't change the car that often anymore. And the only performance gains you can have is by having a better understanding of what you actually have. And sometimes when the car is stable and you start understanding it more, you eke more performance out of it. So that can happen too. That's rare because we're all really focused on constant improvement. And it's rare that you do nothing to the car. But there have been times at Force India, for example, where we couldn't afford what we learned in the tunnel to put on the car. We just didn't have the money. And we just had to improve what we had. And it was amazing how much improvement we were able to extract out of the current car without any new parts going onto it. So that can happen. And they're not that far off. So just a little bit more out of Ferrari, and they could turn it around.
Maybe all the noise goes away. Have you spoken to Fred recently?
No. When I go to the races, I usually leave my briefcase either in Fred's office or Toto's office. And more recently, it's been Toto's. Last year, it was mainly Fred's. I don't like to go to the same place all the time and feel indebted, but it's only leaving my either umbrella if it's raining or my briefcase in their office. But I should go say hi to Fred.
When you did last speak to him, how was he finding the job and life at Ferrari?
Yeah, so when I last spoke to him about that, he he's keenly aware that Ferrari is Italy's national team. It's unlike any other Formula One team. You come to Britain and you've got 7 of them or 8 of them here. And fans pick and choose who they like, whether it's McLaren or Williams or Aston Martin or, there's lots of them here. Whereas Ferrari seems to be the team of the nation. It's kind of like, the England football team. Everyone gets behind that team, and Ferrari's similar. And Fred's aware of that, and he's aware of, the responsibility that comes with that. And he's working hard to do his best for Ferrari and to see him back on top.
How hard is it in this ground effect rules era to unpick these loops when things go wrong? Because you look at Ferrari finishing last season strongly, obviously going for a big redesign of the concept. They said this at the start of the season because they felt the development potential was limited on the 2024 car. They'd run to the end of it. They wanted to have a big push before the rules change. It hasn't worked, and they've kind of taken a step back. How do you go about discovering which part of your loop has caused that issue in this particular era? Because it seems particularly difficult now to understand the track versus the simulation, what isn't talking to each part correctly.
You have to assess that through data analysis and understand why you thought making these changes would result to further performance or more potential performance than you had in the years past, but it didn't. You need to have that understanding so that you don't repeat it next time. And, I saw that when I was at Alpine. We finished 4th in my first year there with a carryover chassis. And the technical director, chief technical officer, head of aero, myself, we all discussed the benefits of having a brand new chassis, so not a carryover or modified chassis from the year before. And the benefits were mainly aerodynamic. We could do some things towards the back of the car that would help flows around the floor. And we all thought that the performance would take a significant step forward. It didn't take the step forward that we thought, and we had to understand why.
So this is now, 22 into 23 then?
22 into 23.
Yeah.
Right. But 22 into 23, the one significant thing that happened was Aston went from the 7th, 8th fastest car, I think they finished 7th in the championship, to, at the beginning, the 2nd fastest car.
That's right, yeah.
So it kind of looked like we took a step backwards from 4th to 5th in the championship, but we really didn't. Aston made huge improvements with some of the people that came from Red Bull and Mercedes, if I remember right. And we made marginal improvements. We definitely got quicker, and we got quicker relative to pole, which is what we always measure ourselves on. However, when you looked at the championship position, it looked like we went one backwards, even though we didn't. We made improvements, not as much as we thought, but we did make improvements, like I said, relative to the fastest car on track. We got closer. However, it looked like from the outside that we took one step back. And that's why I say sometimes, if you take a half a step backwards, because it's all relative to your competition, to take 2 steps forward in the future, you have to have owners that understand the process and allow you to do that. Not to say, hey, look, you've taken a half step backwards. Well, no, we haven't. You gotta understand how we measure these things, and you always measure yourself relative to the fastest car. Have we gotten closer to the fastest car? And if the answer is yes, that means over the winter, you've developed more than the best team have developed or the fastest team. And sometimes that happens because you take big steps and you've learned things you didn't know before. And sometimes that happens because the best team, it's harder to find that next step of performance because you're already there. You've hit that asymptote. But you got to understand all these things before you make decisions to change.
Ferrari definitely hasn't closed the gap relative to the fastest team, McLaren, this year. So bringing it back to kind of the original topic and Fred Vasseur, if you were in Fred's shoes, what would you do differently running that team?
There would be some things I would do differently, but that's my IP, so to speak. I don't want to be telling the world in a podcast, but there are some strategic things that I would do differently. That's for sure. And it's a big strategy play, not small stuff. And I always say, and I've said it before in many podcasts, you can't fix bad strategy with good tactics. And strategy, I'm not talking about on-track strategy of, one stop or two. It's not race strategy. It is strategic,
big picture.
Exactly. Big picture thinking of how you get Ferrari to be the best. And there is one significant thing that I would do. But that's what they pay big bucks to team principals for.
Okay, well, we'll have to wait till you get the job interview, and then you can reveal all to the world when you change the strategy.
I should go tell Fred. Right, Ben. What do you want to talk about next? Your choice.
Well, thank you. I thought we could maybe discuss your old team, Alpine, in part 2, because there've been the usual fun and games going on over there. It's the gift that keeps on giving this season for the F1 media. On our last podcast, Ollie Oakes had just, I think about a week before, departed as team principal suddenly, for personal reasons following the arrest of his brother. We spoke about that on the last show. But since then, Renault Group CEO Luca Di Maio has also left. And Flavio Briatore was asked about Di Maio's exit, whether it would affect the team in any way. And he said, being basically the de facto team boss now, nothing, absolutely nothing has changed for me, not for me or the team. But can that really be the case?
Look, the departure of Luca Di Maio to me was as big of a surprise as everybody, I think. I didn't see it coming. I think I read in the press that not long ago, 6 months ago, he signed a 4-year contract extension with Renault. And in his press statement after the signing of a long extension, he rightfully said, "My work here isn't done. We've had a great start, which Renault have through the Renaulution plan with new products, and the share price was steadily increasing. The shareholders must have been happy, and apart from not performing in Formula One, the car company itself, which is really the job at hand of a Renault Group CEO, the Formula One team is just a nice to have. It's not part of their core business. You know what I mean? So, and the core business was looking good. So I was really surprised, and surprised that 6 months after signing a long-term contract saying my work isn't done, it seemed like the work was done, and perhaps it was done within 6 months. So I was surprised. Whether it has an impact or not on the team, I don't know.
Certainly the decision to bring Flavio Briatore in as a consultant, executive advisor, whatever he wants to call himself, was Di Maio's.
Yes.
So he's definitely seemed hands-on, even, several years into the current project. What do you think will happen to the team if the next CEO, whoever they are, isn't so into F1 as someone like Di Maio?
So I think their choices are keep the team going and maybe rebrand it. It is Alpine now. Alpine, I think, in the near future will only have electric cars. So there isn't really a good correlation between the powertrain of the Formula One team and the powertrain in Alpine cars. Maybe that doesn't matter.
Even with the 26 batteries, you think that's too tenuous?
It's 50-50. So, if it's a hybrid, then fine. Because the 26 onward powertrain in Formula One's a hybrid. But I don't know. I'm not a marketeer, so maybe that works. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe you rebrand, or maybe you say, you know what? I bought this team for a pittance, and now it's worth $1.5 billion. I'm going to sell. I'm going to take that billion and put it in my pocket, or reinvest it within my core business. So, I would imagine something they would look at is perhaps cashing out now, and it was a great decision a few years back to buy it for next to nothing, and now the valuation is over $1 billion. Could be 1.2, could be 1.5 in that region, and take your money and invest it in my core business. So I can see that also being a consideration. Especially with, before, if you just sold to get out and not spend the money on Formula One anymore, that's one thing. But if you now sell to get out and not spend the money on Formula One and put over $1 billion in your pocket, that's a totally different decision that you're making. And, the Renault CEO board have their responsibility is really to the shareholders. And, what would the shareholders want? To continue in Formula One and hope that the valuation goes up and sell it one day, or sell it now when you know that you're going to get a very good price for it, and also you stop spending money on Formula One.
What was De Meo like to deal with? Obviously, he doesn't have the infamy of Carlos Ghosn, but some passion for Formula One, it seemed. What was he like to deal with during your time at Alpine?
Yeah, I only talked to him twice. Once, three times actually. Once when he was very passionate about recruiting me away from Aston. He said he needed somebody that had a good track record in Formula One. Knew what it took to win, how to put together a high performing team, and he seemed very passionate about doing well in Formula One. And then another time I talked to him at the Renault headquarters in Paris, a quick half-hour meeting, just asking me how it was going. That was towards the end of 24, leading up to 25. At the end of 22, leading up to 23. And I just told him of our plans for 23. And then the last time I talked to him was in Montreal in 23. And I explained to him that, it takes time to affect cultural change in a team, especially when you want the culture to be one of a high-performing team and pushing all boundaries to improve on-track performance without worrying about making mistakes. Because if you don't make mistakes, you're not working hard enough. You're not pushing the boundaries enough. And that's when he told me that, I told him how long it should take. And he said, I don't have the time. I've got to do it quicker than that.
So how did he take that news? Did you feel like that was the beginning of the end for you then, really? Once he didn't see eye to eye.
Once I said that, it takes longer to do that, and he said that, well, I don't have the time. I thought, okay, well, we're stuck between a rock and a hard place now, because you just can't do it any faster. And the reason you can't do it any faster is you're trying to recruit good people to come in areas where you're lacking. You can't do a better job until these people arrive. and they're on 2-year contracts, and they're not coming. Some of these guys ended up at Alpine after I left. They stayed 4 weeks and then left.
But that's the instability thing that you referenced earlier, right? You know, if you're trying to build a winning platform and a culture, like you say, you need the thing that you sell to the good people that you want to come to make your outfit better. It needs to be that place, or the foundations of that place when they arrive. If it's completely different and the people have all changed, they're not going to stick around, are they?
There's one fellow that I recruited from Red Bull. Great aerodynamicist. I think he's the only one that's still there. He came after I left, and he is still there today. But the rest of my recruits, and there were many, either didn't come at all. They said, sorry, I'm not coming now. Or like a couple of them came, one for 4 weeks, one for 2-3 months, and they're gone. And they're really good people. One of which, I think he's among the best simulation guys in the world. And he happened to be working, he went from Red Bull to Apple, because Apple were going to do a road car. And he was leading the simulation at Apple in Cupertino.
Is this the guy that's just agreed to come back to work with Adrian Newey at Aston? Or is this a different guy?
Anyway, so I got him to come back from Apple. He had some considerations where he had to stay in America for over a year, and I said no problem. That's because it's a long-term project. You stay in America to make sure that you get everything done that you need to do there, so you can freely come back to England and then come work for us. And we supported him through that entire process. And yep, he came back for a month at Alpine and left. And yeah, you're right. He's now gone to work with Adrian.
What do you make of Flavio Briatore's leadership and his style of running that team?
Well, I mean, I'm not there with him. I don't know if his style and my style are similar or different. But what I started in '98 in Formula One when Flavio was selling us Supertech engines at British American Racing. And I remember the launch of the BAR 199. It was our first launch. It was held in Brackley, big marquee out the side, and Flavio did a speech, and I was in the audience as the operations director of the team during the launch. That's the first time I ever saw Flavio, first time I met him. The reason I tell you that is I've seen managerial styles change significantly from back in 1998 or even in the mid 2000s to what it is today. I think the world's changed, and we have millennials and Gen Zs and all sorts of other labels for people that have been born more recently than I have or Flavio has, for example. And I think to manage in today's world is different than what you did back in the late 90s or mid 2000s. And I don't know if Flavio has adjusted his management style or if it's still the same as it was back then. But I do know that, and not so much Flavio, but everybody back then that was running Formula One teams seemed to have different management styles than is being employed today. Ron Dennis, for example, he managed a bit differently. And, Patrick Head and Adrian Reynard, who I worked with. It was just different.
Yeah, certainly. How do you see his position now at Alpine, given De Meo's step down and perhaps a bit earlier than expected?
Well, I mean, Flavio did say that nothing changes, and I'll take his word for that. That business as usual. The thing that I see there is next year, 2026, they will have an advantage with going with the Mercedes powertrain. So from a purely on-track performance perspective, they're going to be better off. I think Mercedes will do a very good job, and they will be one of the Mercedes customers. I mean, this year, I predict Mercedes powertrain will win the world championship.
It's a pretty surefire bet at the moment, I would say. Could you imagine making that decision yourself? If you cast your mind back to being at Alpine, having this theoretical advantage of being a works team, would you have ever considered, never mind executing, the decision to give that up for a high performing customer powertrain?
It all depends why you're in Formula One. So if you're in Formula One to win, then you have to have the best powertrain. It's just that simple. If you're in Formula One for other reasons, where perhaps tying the Formula One team to your road cars, then maybe you make a different decision. But for me, it's always been about on-track competitiveness. So if that's what it's about, then you want the best powertrain. And if you're a customer, the beauty of being a customer is you can pick and choose the best powertrain. So if one year Honda's the best and you're sitting there as McLaren, you say, you know what, thanks Mercedes, but looks like Honda are better. My next contract, I'm going to try to get a Honda. And in the past, people used to say, well, if you're not a works team, you're at a disadvantage. But is that really the case? Braun were able to beat McLaren when McLaren was a Mercedes works team. And McLaren are now beating Mercedes when Mercedes are the works team. Especially in today's formula, I think being a works team is less meaningful than it was in the past.
Bringing it back to Alpine, Team Enstone, we might call it, which actually has been a Mercedes customer in the past. This won't be the first time. What do you make of the whole situation and the impact on that team? Does it kind of make you sad as a former team principal of that organisation to see how much chaos and turmoil seems to just constantly envelop that outfit now? And how resilient is the culture as well in terms of dealing with that?
Yeah, it does, because there are some very good people there. I feel for them because, humans we don't like change. You know what I mean? We like stability.
Not too much anyway, yeah.
Not too much. You like stability, because with change is risk, and, we don't like risk. So I do feel for some of the people, and I hope that, soon they will get to a position where there is some stability there, and you can start rebuilding. I mean, I'm not pointing out anything that the whole world doesn't know. You just have to look at the constructors table. They're last in the constructors championship this year, and it just shows that, poor decision making or instability at the top still correlates to not such great performance on track. So when you get that churn at the top, and the people that actually do the important work and have the knowledge see it as a risky place to work, they then go look elsewhere and start working elsewhere in an environment that's more stable. Okay, Ben, final part of the podcast now, and I gather you've got one more topic of conversation for us.
That's right. After talking about one of your former teams in part 2, I'd like to talk about another of your former teams in part 3. We mentioned Alpine's struggles, but Aston Martin also had a pretty rocky start to this season, and most recently a very strange, mysterious drama around Lance Stroll and his sudden departure from the Barcelona paddock in the middle of qualifying with a flare-up of a wrist injury, which he first did pre-season in 2023. Knowing Lance as you do, and having worked with him closely before, what do you think really went on in that situation?
Well, I know he severely broke his wrist cycling, I think, in Spain over the winter before the start of the season, and I was really, really surprised that he actually drove at the start of the season because he only had a couple of weeks to have that wrist injury to a point where it didn't pain him to drive. And I'm just wondering that did he actually push too hard and start too early, or would it have been better to let it heal a little bit more? I'm no doctor, so I don't know. But one thing I do know is that both, mainly driven by Lawrence, they always have the best medical advice possible, and I would do exactly the same. You know what I mean? You shouldn't. There's two things I always say you never skimp on: is doctors and lawyers. Always get the best you can. So I'm sure Lance had great medical advice, and but he was I think very brave to come back as early from that wrist injury as he did. Now, what aggravated it in Barcelona, I don't know, but because it was so severe, I could imagine either driving or some kind of forces, some inputs into the wrist that were either excessive or repetitive, aggravated it to the point where he couldn't drive. So I just heard that, from some of the mechanics that when you looked at his wrist, it was like twice the size. It really swelled up.
Ouch.
So but knowing Lance, that he did come back very early from his initial injury, if he could drive, he would have. That's for sure. So it had to be really, really painful for him not to drive. He's a competitor, like everybody else. He wants to do really well. And, there are flashes of his car control brilliance that you often see in the wet. If you give him a good car, Lance can win. That's for sure. And I think what they need to concentrate on is improving the car. And with Adrian Newey there for 2026, they've got every chance in the world.
I was going to ask you what you make of Lance as a driver, because he gets a lot of criticism from fans and media too, saying basically he's only there because of his dad, and that kind of follows him around all the time. So is that fair criticism? Is it, or does he belong in Formula One, independent of that whole Lawrence thing?
The reason he gets that criticism is because his dad does own the team and he drives for it. So there's nobody else in that situation. There's nobody else in that situation apart from Lance. He is very talented. All the drivers are, including Lance. He's up against one of the best ever in Fernando Alonso, and he's often not far from him or even ahead of him sometimes. At the start of the season, Lance was the only point scorer. He had 14 points for a very long time. I think he's still ahead of Fernando today in the championship.
When a driver is in that unique position you mentioned, like Lance is, he's the only one who's driving for a team in F1 that his dad owns. Obviously, there are other situations where drivers can have a unique influence in a team because of the sponsorship they bring or the clout they have, the success, the track record, the reputation, whatever it might be. How does that affect your job as the team principal? And how specifically was it different for you when you had to manage Lance in his scenario?
Yeah, so, like I said, Lance is a supreme competitor, wants to beat all the other drivers, just like all the other drivers want to beat him, if you know what I mean, or, beat everybody. So from that regard, Lance didn't need any more motivation than anyone else. He was pretty self-motivated to do what it takes for on-track performance. Not many drivers like to go to events that don't require driving a racing car fast on track, so to speak. And, Lance, too, didn't like some of the sponsor events that drivers need to go to. So if your father owns a team, it's harder to motivate a driver to do some of the events that you were called upon to do that you really didn't like doing. Not many drivers like to do those things when the choice is either going karting or simulator work or work at the factory, or some leisure activities, be it cycling or getting fit, or doing some events that you otherwise wouldn't want to do, and your dad owns a team, then it's harder to say, look, you've got to go do this or we're not paying you, as an example.
But did you have to treat him differently in other ways because of Lawrence being there and being in charge, or were you able to pretty much treat him like any other driver?
We treated him like any other driver. And not just me, but everybody. When we thought there are areas of improvement that we could all make, we sat and talked to him and said, look, in our experience, do this and we'll be better off. We told him, no different than any other driver that came to us. And Lance he doesn't say much, so it's hard to get to know him. But if you get to know him in a team environment, he's great. He's a very nice and kind human being. And his mechanics love him. The engineering team get on really well with him. And they want the best for him. And like I said, he's a super nice guy.
It's an interesting perspective, actually, because there's been a couple of examples, quite public ones, of him not dealing with disappointment very well. I mean, no driver does really, but
no driver
taking his frustrations out on the team, etc. So what is there a mismatch between public perception and what Lance is really like? Because as you say, he is quite guarded. You don't really get the impression of a guy who's super motivated, super engaged, very good with the media, etc. Yeah. So that probably lets him down in that regard.
It does. You got to get to know him in other ways, not through the media. And once you get to know him like that, just ask his friends. He's got a very close bunch of friends that come to a lot of races, and when you have that, it's because you're a nice guy and you're fun to be with, and he's got friends that come from when he was in high school in Canada, and other friends from from his racing in the lower formulas, and they come to the races and they support him, and I'm sure they also go skiing with him in the winter and all the other stuff he does. But once you get to know him at that level, like I said, he's super nice and fun to be around. And it's just, when you're not in the media always, the rest of the world doesn't know that. You've got to get to know him from inside the team.